Looking back, it's easy to see what made Alien such a groundbreaking piece of cinema, but the story of how it all came together is not as clear-cut as you would imagine. In fact, it's a miracle the movie turned out as good as it did.
And it all started with this guy, Dan O'Bannon. In 1975, the 29-year-old O'Bannon's short-lived filmmaking career had already hit rock bottom. After writing and starring in John Carpenter's debut film, the sci-fi parody Dark Star, O'Bannon moved on to Alejandro Jodorowsky's ill-fated adaptation of Dune to oversee the film's special effects. When that project collapsed under the weight of its ballooning budget, O'Bannon fell into dire straits.
He was broke, homeless, and sleeping on producer Ronald Shuset's sofa, and this left him absolutely determined to write something that someone would want to make.
He started kicking around ideas for a horror spin on Dark Star, and he fused this concept with another script he'd been working on that featured a B-17 bomber crew being harassed by gremlins. As for his central monster, the Xenomorph, O'Bannon took inspiration from his own ongoing health issues. During the scriptwriting process, O'Bannon was struggling with severe stomach ache, which was later diagnosed as Crohn's disease, and he channeled this into his work, conceptualizing the now iconic chestburster, which was a surrogate for the pain erupting in his stomach. He brought all these disparate elements together, and the final result was Starbeast.
Yep, Starbeast.
O'Bannon finally settled on the much more evocative title of Alien, after noting how many times the characters said the word during his screenplay.
This first pass of the script was largely similar to the story we ultimately saw on the big screen. Space truckers get an unknown distress signal, investigate a derelict ship, facehugger, chestburster, alien kills them all.
But reaction from the Hollywood studios to this initial screenplay was mixed. B-movie legend Roger Corman and his studio were one of the few interested in producing a low-budget film. But O'Bannon passed on this offer after he was convinced by his friend, production executive Mark Haggard, to hold out for a better deal.
What happened next is perhaps what saved Alien from becoming a late 70s B-movie. The story goes that Haggard handed O'Bannon's script directly into the hands of Walter Hill, director of The Warriors, right through the office window of Hill's new studio, Brandywine Productions.
Haggard's timing could not have been better, as Brandywine had a first-look deal in place with 20th Century Fox, a studio that at the time were in the market for sci-fi scripts. In 1977, science fiction was the hot ticket. Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind had just released huge box office numbers, and Hollywood studios were looking to go all in on the genre. And one of these studios was 20th Century Fox, which had just seen an unprecedented level of box office success with Star Wars, and as a result they were on the lookout for new sci-fi projects, and suddenly Alien had its chance.
But there was one problem. Walter Hill thought O'Bannon's script was awful. The one thing that stopped him from throwing it in the bin was the central set piece that came to define the whole movie.
Hill and his writing partner David Giler set about redrafting the entire script with a view to pitching it to Fox immediately. They did a top-to-bottom rewrite of all the dialogue, developed the subplot involving Ash the android, and perhaps my favourite change, added in Jones the cat.
While O'Bannon was not enamoured with their changes, in fact he would later go on to redraft the script again to be closer to his original, it was enough to get Fox to greenlight the movie, and they started looking for a director to helm their new sci-fi blockbuster.
The studio considered a whole load of candidates, including a young Steven Spielberg, but they finally settled on British director Ridley Scott, who had made his name directing commercials but only had a single film credit to his name at the time, a period movie called The Duelists. Scott loved the script, and after being impressed by Star Wars, saw Alien as an opportunity to put his stamp on the sci-fi genre. He went away and over the course of 3 weeks extensively storyboarded the entire film. When he presented to Fox what he called his Ridleygrams, storyboards that considered the design, lighting and composition of each scene, the studio immediately doubled the budget and fast-tracked Alien into pre-production.
With pre-production underway, the all-important design process began in earnest. O'Bannon was hired to oversee it, and he set about creating a design dream team from the ashes of the failed Dune project.
British illustrator Chris Foss, who had worked on the spaceship designs for Dune, was brought on board alongside cultural cartoonist Ron Cobb to sketch out the initial designs of the crew's spaceship, the Nostromo, the alien planet, and of course the titular alien itself. Naturally, the core design of the alien was the hardest nut to crack. Cobb, Foss, and O'Bannon each took a stab at designing the monster, and their initial attempts were interesting to say the least. But it was the hiring of one Hans Rudi Giger, yet another alumni from Dune, that would prove the most instrumental to the aesthetics of Alien.
One of the key design goals for Alien was to avoid the trope of the bug-eyed monster, common to films like It Came from Outer Space. And it was in Giger's 1977 work Necronomicon that O'Bannon and Scott found their solution.
Giger's portfolio was heavily inspired by H.P. Lovecraft's nightmarish visions from the 1920s and 1930s, and it was in Necronomicon 4 that Ridley Scott saw the movie's central monster. Giger was immediately brought on board to consult with the design team before fully joining the production for 7 months to design the various elements of the Xenomorph's life cycle, from egg to facehugger and finally its fully grown form. Giger imbued all of his work with heavy sexual undertones and phallic imagery to reflect the themes he saw in the script, and this stance made for otherworldly designs that stood out against the cold realism of Cobb and Foss's work on the Nostromo. Giger's early designs for the egg, for example, featured what he termed an organic vagina-like opening that drew immediate concern from the film's producers who foresaw trouble in Catholic territories like Spain and Italy.
Ironically, Giger's fix for this was to add another incision to the egg, which made it appear in the image of a crucifix, a detail that was luckily not picked up on at the time.
His design for the facehugger, meanwhile, contained more sexual motifs. Giger's initial sketch started off as an enlarged sexual organ that he just added 2 hands to. And the final form of the alien, heavily reminiscent of his own work Necronomicon 4, sported a giant phallic head, which Giger gifted the function of an extendable tongue, a detail that Scott would go on to use pretty suggestively in the final film.
As a stark contrast to Giger's alien concepts, the various designs from the Nostromo were all geared around believability.
Ridley Scott was keen on creating a spaceship that took equal inspiration from Gothic cathedrals and, of all things, North Sea oil rigs. And Cobb and Foss implemented these ideas with practicality and realism in mind. As a result, the final design of the Nostromo, effectively a steamer ship towing a castle in space, was grounded within real-world concepts. The interior was equally approached with reality in mind. The environments were designed to be functional and lived in, and these attributes were enhanced by art director Roger Christian, who populated the sets with various pieces of salvage and scrap from airplanes. The final piece of the design puzzle was concept artist Jean Girard, aka Mobius, who only worked on Alien for a couple of days at the behest of Ridley Scott. But his samurai-style sketches for the Nostromo crew's spacesuits became the final design for the costumes worn in the movie.
While elements of Alien's design process clearly owe a debt of gratitude to the grubby sci-fi aesthetics of Star Wars, Giger's work on the alien and its life cycle was truly groundbreaking.
Before Alien, sci-fi creature design had a reputation for cheap-looking monsters, men in plastic suits, and little grey aliens. During his time on the movie, Giger truly elevated the design process for genre cinema, and his work would go on to inspire everything from the body horror of the 80s, The Thing and The Fly especially, to the creature design of 2000's Pitch Black, and even 2017's Life.
And while he never had the same creative freedom on the Alien franchise again, his design work would undeniably be one of the keys to the series' success over the years.
When it came to casting, O'Bannon's initial script offered up a unique perspective. His screenplay simply listed, the crew is unisex and all parts are interchangeable for men or women. This idea was born from a desire to allow each actor to flesh out their specific character during production, as this gave O'Bannon the space and inspiration to work on developing the various plot concepts and mechanics in his script.
The lack of character development was a blessing in disguise though, as it led to the now iconic casting of the franchise's most important character, Ripley.
Despite the original plan for the casting to be interchangeable, the role of Ripley had originally been envisioned for a man, but when the producers sought to change it, allegedly at the behest of Fox president Alan Ladd Jr., this opened the door for one Sigourney Weaver.
Look, I've got the toughest job on this ship. I've got to put up with all your bullshit.
Weaver had only starred in a single film at the time, and was by no means an established actor. But her extensive theatre experience and towering presence convinced Ridley Scott and the film's producers that they had found their star. And Ladd Jr., who had been after a more bankable star, was won over when he was reminded how successful Star Wars had been with unknown actors in the lead roles. The rest of the cast was made up of a variety of established character actors, chief among them Tom Skerritt, Yaphet Kotto, Ian Holm and John Hurt. What made this cast stand out from the rest of the horror crowd was their age. While other horror films at the time like Halloween and Friday the 13th were skewing younger, Alien skewed older. These characters were just men and women in space trying to get a job done. They felt less disposable compared to the horny teenagers of Alien's peers, and the result was a cast who the audience could relate to and sympathise with.
Production on Alien was a tight, scrappy affair, largely due to a modest budget and a compressed schedule imposed on Ridley Scott by 20th Century Fox.
Scott, who at the time was working on only his second movie in a genre he had little to no experience in, harnessed this mentality and infused his direction with the adage that less is more. And this undoubtedly had a profound effect on how he ran the production. For the sequences set on the alien planet, Scott originally sought to shoot on location in Turkey, but was convinced to create the environment on a studio soundstage instead. As a result, Giger was tasked with visualizing what the planet's surface would look like, and he brought it to life as a 1:2 scale model, which he built largely out of clay and bones. Smack in the middle of this vast set was the derelict spaceship, dubbed the Croissant by the crew, which Giger designed to look organic as if it had never been touched by humanity. While the combined set and model were huge, Scott further emphasised the scale by shooting the sequence where Dallas, Kane and Lambert approached the derelict ship with children, including his two sons wearing the spacesuits.
As huge as Giger's models were, the largest set was reserved for the space jockey's chamber, the enormous room with the mysterious alien in it. And the designs were so monumental that the whole sequence was nearly cut.
The film's producers, who wanted to keep the budget in check, tried to strong-arm Scott into nixing the sequence. Scott, who was keen to keep it on the grounds that it helped give the film a sense of epic scale, stood his ground, and he came up with an ingenious idea to keep the set and minimise the costs. His solution was to build half of the set, which would then rotate around the central space jockey to allow the cameras to get reverse shots. Scott and his team then went one step further by repurposing the set for the egg room, which they redressed and covered in mist and an eerie blue light that came from a laser borrowed from rock band The Who.
When it came to the crew's spaceship, Scott and his team constructed the Nostromo as a fully interlinked set, with corridors connecting the various crew quarters to the central control deck.
Allegedly, once you were on the Nostromo, you couldn't tell that you were on a film soundstage, and this created an immersive atmosphere for the actors who were having to figure out their characters on the fly. Scott then exploited this sense of immersion and claustrophobia to keep the cast on edge during production.
When shooting with the alien through any of its various stages, Scott and the crew kept the creature effects carefully under wraps.
Giger's nightmarish designs for the alien were being brought to life by Balaji Badejo, a 6'10" graphic design student who was found completely by chance by a member of the casting team in a London pub. His towering stature and slender physique made him an ideal candidate to play the central monster, and his performance marked the alien out as a uniquely terrifying creature. The cast were not allowed to see Badejo as the xenomorph or any form of the alien right up until they had their scenes with it, and this rule led to one of the greatest moments of horror cinema, the infamous chestburster scene.
What's the matter? The food ain't that bad, baby.
It may have been wildly exaggerated over the years, but the story behind this central set piece is almost as famous as the scene itself.
The account goes that the only actor who knew the full extent of what was about to happen was John Hurt, in part due to the fact that he was strapped to a dummy chest full of fake blood and gore. The rest of the cast knew something would be bursting out of Hurt's character, but they were largely kept in the dark about how the special effects were going to play out. Either way, when the alien erupted from Hurt's chest, jettisoning blood and gore at the surprised cast, their reaction was vividly realistic. Veronica Cartwright was even knocked clean off her feet by a rogue spray of blood in one take. The end result became a watershed moment for horror cinema, an iconic sequence that has become so lodged in our cinematic subconscious that it's been parodied in everything from Toy Story to Spaceballs.
Oh no, not again.
While Alien was originally supposed to end with the destruction of the Nostromo, Ridley Scott envisioned a new ending.
He proposed a fourth act aboard the escape shuttle where Ripley would have one final confrontation with the alien. He pitched his idea to Fox and managed to get them to agree to give him $500,000 and a week to shoot it. His initial plan was incredibly bleak though. Scott wanted the alien to overpower Ripley, bite her head off, and record the ship's final log using her voice.
This horrifying idea was thankfully nixed by the film's producers though, who wanted the alien to be destroyed at the film's conclusion, and this was the ending that Scott eventually shot. And with that, Alien finally wrapped production.
Alien was released on May the 25th, 1979, with the now iconic tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." The film made just shy of 80 million at the US box office, around 300 million by today's standards, and it was nominated for 2 Oscars for Best Art Direction and Best Visual Effects, the latter of which it won. While it undeniably struck a chord with audiences, many of whom had quite a visceral reaction to the central chestburster sequence, it got a decidedly mixed response from critics at the time, who praised the visuals but saw the film as a hollow sci-fi thriller. But the film's appeal has strengthened greatly over the years. Critics would later delve deeply into Alien's rich thematic foundations, analysing the film's overtly sexual undertones. Its striking visual design, bar a few computer screens, has remarkably not dated, largely thanks to Giger and Scott's strong design ethos. And in the Xenomorph, O'Bannon and Giger created a living nightmare, a cinematic monster that arguably hasn't been improved on.
But it is Ripley that is perhaps Alien's most enduring legacy. Her emergence as the central survivor marks her out as one of cinema's earliest female heroes, and Weaver would go on to stay with the franchise for the better part of the next 2 decades.
Ridley Scott's 1979 original would go on to kickstart a franchise of sequels, prequels, crossovers with the Predator series, comic books, video games, and even a high school play. The franchise has never quite recaptured the lightning-in-a-bottle brilliance of the original, but the Alien series has always remained a fascinating, engaging franchise that isn't afraid to reinvent itself, and that all started with Alien's compelling foundations.
Ultimately though, the franchise's enduring legacy is a testament to the work of Dan O'Bannon, H.R. Giger and Ridley Scott. With Alien, they created a uniquely terrifying beast, or simply put, the perfect organism.